Today we're talking grubby diseased Terminators, with a look at the Blightlords, the elite of the Death Guard. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. In today's video we're continuing in our look at Death Guard, this time focusing on the Blightlord Terminators with a full datasheet review, where in this video we're going to talk through their rules and wargear options, any obvious combos and synergies that we can see for them in game, and the ways that I think about using them myself on the tabletop. In the background, the Blightlords are an elite Terminator formation, utilised exclusively within the ranks of the Death Guard Traitor Legion, each clad in an ancient suit of cataphracti patterned Terminator armour. These deadly warriors very much embody Nurgle as a merciless reaper, unflinchingly stalking towards the enemy, as inevitable as death itself. Combi bolters scythe through the ranks of the enemy, and when they engage the foe in close combat, they strike them down with bale sword and bubotic axe, and monstrous flails of corruption. Blightlord Terminators are often employed in ship-to-ship boarding actions, the tip of the festering spear of the Death Guard assault, grimly hacking through the enemy and leaving nothing but maggot-strewn corpses in their wake. Let's see what these brutal warriors can do in game. So here we have a datasheet for the Blightlord Terminators. A credit to Warhapedia for the datasheet. They are of course an elite's choice for Codex Death Guard, and they'll cost you 43 points per model. You get them in squads of between 5 and 10, and they have a very powerful, if very slow, stat line. They've got only a movement 4, but weapon skill and ballistic skill 3+, strength 4, toughness 5, 2 wounds, 2 attacks, leadership 8 and a 2+ save. Already fairly respectable defensive stats, but it's further augmented by their cataphracti armour, which gives them a 4+ invul save, and of course disgusting resilience, giving them a 5+ feel no pain on top of that. There are very few weapons that will deal efficient damage to Blightlord Terminators. Most anti-infantry small arms will struggle against their toughness 5 and 2+ armour, and anti-tank weapons will only kill 1 Terminator maximum per shot, and will still have a decent chance of failing to wound or getting saved on that very good invul save. Their main weakness is being very slow, and on top of that very weedy movement of 4, they must also half the dice rolls when they determine how far they advance due to their cataphracti armour. These are certainly a unit that's fairly possible to kite. In terms of their wargear, each Terminator is armed with a combi bolter and either a bale sword or bubotic axe. Their combi bolters are rapid fire 2 bolt weapons, and they'll always be spitting out 4 shots at 24 inches due to malicious volleys, and the fact that the Blightlords are Terminators. Bale swords and bubotic axes are essentially power weapons and power axes with a plague weapon keyword, so they reroll once to wound. We'll get onto their other wargear options in just a second, but before we do, let's just mention a couple of their other special rules. As Terminators, they have the teleport strike special rule, which is really useful for getting them where they need to be, because of course their movement isn't going to do that very easily. Being able to jump down and set up 9 inches away from the enemy can really get them where they need to go quickly, something that's very useful for the slow moving Death Guard. Finally, they have Aura of Rust, which is an ability that gives them extra AP whenever they make a wound roll of 6+ for the unit, provided they're attacking with melee weapons. If that happens, then they gain 1 additional AP, so for example if they were attacking with a bubotic axe at AP -2, it would become AP -3 instead. Not that big a buff, but quite nice to have. Overall as a unit they're solid in melee against most things, but particularly infantry, pretty decent at cutting through light infantry with those combi bolters at range, and of course an absolute nightmare to shift, as is often the way with Nurgle units. So let's talk about their wargear options now. Firstly, you have to choose whether to arm the majority of the squad with bale swords or bubotic axes. Out of the two, for me, I would typically pick the bubotic axe. I think that having strength 5 attacks is better than having strength 4 attacks, even if it costs you 1 pip of AP. Both weapons cost you exactly the same, so there's no trade-off there. At the moment, I think the bubotic axe is the way to go. At time of recording, we don't know whether the bale swords will get the power weapon buff to go up to strength 5. If this does happen, then I suspect that the bale swords will actually be the way to go, as I'd rather have strength 5 and AP -3 rather than strength 6 and AP -2. I think it's breaking the gap from strength 4 to strength 5 that's the really important thing. Next, you have the option to swap out their combi bolters on the unit. Any model can take a combi weapon, either a combi flamer, combi melter or combi plasma, and you could potentially use it to really raise the range damage output of the unit. For me, I'm not really all that enthused about the combi flamers on them. They will be buffed very shortly by the FAQ to go to 12-inch range, I believe, but even then I'm just not sure you're really adding a lot. They're already very good against infantry both at range and in close combat, so for the same points cost I want something that makes them a bit better against harder targets. I think both the plasma and the melter could certainly be viable. I think the plasma will give you the better damage output on the whole, though it is the riskier option, because if you roll any 1s to hit with them overcharged, then you'll potentially slay a very expensive model. I'd really only think about using combi plasmas if I had a Chaos Lord in tow. For general purposes though, I'd be pretty happy just to stick with the combi bolters. They're already quite good and are very cheap. From there you have the option to take a heavy weapon for 1 in every 5 of them, either a Plague Spewer, a Blight Launcher or a Reaper Autocannon. They're all 10 points, so that'll cost you 7 points more than the combi bolter. At the moment the Plague Spewer is a pretty poor option, seeing as it won't be in range out of Deep Strike, but if it gets the buff to go up to 12-inch range, then at least it'll be worth consideration. Out of the other two, my favourite is the Blight Launcher. Strength 6, decent AP, and multiple damage just makes them a little bit more of a threat at range to pretty much everything, and I'd certainly be happy to take 1 or 2 in the squad. Finally, and potentially saving the best till last, is the Flail of Corruption. This one costs 15 points, but you do sub out the Bale Sword and the Combi Bolter for it, so again it's really only a 7-point upgrade compared with the standard Terminator. Honestly, these things are just really good. They turn the unit from a moderately good close combat unit into a really scary one. With Hateful Assault, each Terminator with a flail will be having 3d3 attacks, and again decent strength, decent AP and multiple damage will do good stuff against everything, but particularly against 1-wound infantry, where the Flail of Corruption really shines just due to the damage spilling over from each attack. I'd certainly take 1 of these in a 5-man unit, and 2 in a 10-man. Now if we move on to talk about combos and synergies for the unit, as with Death Guard and having a lot of character buffs, the Blightlord Terminators are in a reasonable position to receive multiple ones of these, though often with deep striking it might be a little bit harder to coordinate than maybe Plague Marines starting on the ground. You can of course give them rerolls with a Chaos Lord or Demon Prince, potentially use the Foul Blight Spawn to make them very scary to charge by allowing them to strike first. The Tallyman could allow them to reroll all their melee hits, and the Plague Surgeon could allow them to have better Disgusting and Resilience rolls, and also maybe buff their plague weapons with hypertoxic tinctures if desired. If you did want some deep striking support alongside the Blight Lords, and you didn't mind spending a few more points, you could potentially use one of those Terrax drills to transport some support characters up to you, maybe alongside some Plague Marines. Mephitic Blight Haulers are also handy to have around. They can make the unit always in cover, giving them a 2+ save with an extra +1, meaning that even AP -1 weapons you'll still be saving on 2s. And plenty of the Death Guard Psychic Discipline can be pretty handy as well. Miasma of Pestilence and -1 to hit is always great. Blades of Putrefaction will make those melee weapons just turn into something that will go through nearly any unit in the game, and Putrescent Vitality can give them an extra pip of strength and toughness as well, which is particularly handy for the Bale Swords, so if you did want it to go that way, then that could get them to strength 5. If you're allying in a Sorcerer as well, then Warp Time could be handy to get them a bit more movement, and also Prescience for a little bit of extra shooting accuracy. Finally, as is usually the case with Death Guard, if you can have your Warlord with the Arch Contaminator trait anywhere nearby, then full rerolls to wound on any of those plague weapons in combat, again is just going to make them so much more dangerous, and really allow them to chew through exactly what they want. There's a couple of plague companies that are helpful for the Terminators as well. First we have Mortarian's Anvil, which has a Terminator specific stratagem that you activate when the opponent tries to shoot at them. It costs 2 command points if you've got 5 Terminators or less, and 3 command points if you have more than this, but I think it could potentially be worth it if you really want them just to live through an insane amount of firepower. It basically just makes all of the enemy attacks -1 damage, so any damage 2 weapons will go to damage 1, and could be very good for keeping them safe from say a massive volley of overcharged plasma. A little pricey, but I think in the right circumstances this could be really good. They also have a stratagem to allow heroic intervention on any unit, which could mean that your opponent would not be able to stand anywhere near these Terminators, and they can also further buff their Tallyman for an extra melee buff, so if you were starting them on the board, then you could be both re-rolling all hits and also have exploding 6s as well. The other potentially good one for Terminators is the Ferryman, who have another Terminator specific stratagem that gives them +1 to hit when shooting. Could potentially be very nice out of Deep Strike, jump in 10 Terminators, and maybe have 8 Combi Bolters and a couple of Blight Launchers hitting on 2s. In terms of stratagems, one of the potentially most powerful ones is Cloud of Flies. This could really be abused on Blightlord Terminators. It's just 1 command point, and it means the opponent can't shoot them unless they're the closest. Unlike many of the other infantry units in the Death Guard army, Blightlord Terminators are a really scary threat and can't exactly just be ignored. So if you do just have the opportunity to turn off a huge amount of shooting of the enemy army for a turn, then you might force them to target something that's even tougher in the list, maybe things like Plague Burst Crawlers. You can also use Grandfather's Blessings, which is 2 command points to potentially revive a Terminator. And of course the old favourite Veterans of the Long War to give them +1 to wound, which actually stacks really well in close combat with their fairly low strength weapons, and also the fact that they get extra AP with that aura of rust. To be honest, it's absolutely fine in the shooting phase as well, again potentially when they're firing quite a lot of decent low strength shots. War of the Spider gave them several more unique options. If the enemy does manage the task of killing the unit, then you can use Eruption of Filth to essentially have an exploding Terminator. It'd only really be that useful if it was right in the middle of an enemy army, but it could allow you to fling a few mortal wounds around with that. There's Relentless Volleys to make your Combi Bolters Rapid Fire 3. It'd be 2 command points on a big unit of them, but it could allow you to have 60 shots coming out of a full unit of these guys on reserve if you wanted it. And finally there's Life Eater, which gives you an automatic wound on a hit roll of 6. A small but meaningful close combat buff could be particularly useful against very high toughness foes. So how would I go about using these guys in game then? First of all, in terms of unit loadout, I'd be quite happy to run anything from a small 5-man squad to a big 10-man squad. The 10-man units will take stratagems and buffs that little bit better, but even the smaller squads are really quite a significant investment and a powerful unit on the table. I pretty much always take the Flail of Corruption, and I might consider a Blight Launcher to upgrade the unit's firepower. Once you've got your unit of Terminators, in any given game you're going to have to decide whether they're starting on the board or coming in from reserve, and I typically say that the default option would usually be to start in reserve, as it really does help counteract their weakness of slow movement. When you jump down, at least you'll get 1 full round of shooting, then you'll have the chance of a charge at 9 inches, which I would certainly save a command point for, to give you around about a 50% chance of engaging. I think it's quite helpful to have a powerful unit like this in reserve, as it means that you can apply pressure to maybe a weak area of the board for you, or maybe jump in to sweep some enemy backfield units off objectives. However, I think you could potentially design your list to start them on the board and have them be very effective doing so despite that 4-inch movement. It might also be the better option against really big board control or horde armies, which might just be able to spread out and take up all the good drop zones anyway. So you might not really be gaining all that much by pushing them in deep strike if you're just going to be dropping into your own deployment zone anyway, due to the enemy army being everywhere else. I'd be thinking about using some shenanigans, such as moving up some Plague Burst crawlers with Plague Spitters into the midfield and marching these guys up behind them, and then making them untargetable with Cloud of Flies. That should leave you completely free to hose the enemy with combi bolters each turn, and if the enemy army moves up to take some midfield objectives, it should give you an easy charge to cut them apart with plague weapons and flails of corruption. This way would give you a bit more of an option in terms of using character buffs more effectively, as you could have the characters move up with them, and you could potentially counteract their very slow movement by using warp time, which could potentially give you an 8-inch movement per turn to get them up the board just that little bit quicker. When you've engaged in the enemy, hopefully those flails of corruption will be putting in some good work. I'd most certainly consider using veterans on the long war on any sort of big unit of these guys. It'll be pretty strong on them both at range and in melee. You could also potentially try and wrap and trap some enemy units, at least force them to use that desperate breakout stratagem, and maybe cause even more problems for the opponent's army trying to target your incredibly tough Terminators. In terms of competitors within the Codex, the obvious biggest competitors are the Death Shroud Terminators, who can also appear from nowhere and provide some very decent melee. They're a little bit more expensive, so it won't be quite as durable point for point, and you can't get them in quite as big units. They are significantly fightier in melee though with those Man Reapers, potentially being able to cut through some very, very hard targets in just one turn. I honestly think that both flavours of Terminators are viable, though I would personally swing towards these Blightlords myself. I think I prefer the mix of range and melee damage rather than being almost exclusively melee. Finally, I just want to say that 3-wound Terminators are going to be incredibly scary, and the Blightlord Terminators are going to be some of the scariest in the game, I think. 3 wounds, a 4+ invul save and disgustingly resilient is just going to be monstrously hard to shift, and if you need an unyielding Anvil of Death, then these guys are really going to be a good go-to in the next codex. We will have to wait and see just how much their points increase because of this though. So let me know what you think of the unit down in the comments below, particularly if I've missed any cool combos or synergies, or any other ways that you can think of to use the unit in game. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. We'll certainly try and keep some of the Death Guard videos coming over the next few weeks and months, and I'll certainly be reviewing the Codex in depth when we get it. If you've been enjoying the videos and would like to help support the channel, I'd just like to mention that I have a Patreon page which you can find down in the video description below. Making this amount of YouTube content certainly does take a fair bit of time, and Patreon is the only way that I can afford to do this as more of a full-time thing. If you are interested in supporting, there's a fair few benefits in doing so. You get to see a video per week early, there's regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and you're also automatically entered into the Auspex Tactics monthly prize giveaway with a chance to win some big model kits. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd like to help support the channel, then the link is down in the video description below. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.